Well, good afternoon. This is Danielle Casey with the Greater Sacramento Economic Council. I'm very excited because I'm seeing our number of participants grow exponentially. Looks like we have 70 and climbing on our list. So we're so thrilled that everyone can join us. I'm just going to be giving a few housekeeping comments today. We really appreciate everyone joining. This webinar is being recorded. So following today's program, we will be sending a post-webinar survey out. And if you fill out our survey, we will send you a link to the recording. So that's a little bit of a bonus for you for telling us how we did and what programs you want to see in the future. If anyone has any technical issues or general questions, please look at your Zoom toolbar. You can utilize the chat function to submit those questions, and we have staff that's monitoring that. For anyone who has a question for a speaker, please submit it using the Q&A tool. This is very important for us because that tool will record your questions. If we don't get to all your questions today, we can therefore use those for follow-up, maybe in future webinar programs or in some written responses. It is now my pleasure to hand control over to District 1 Supervisor for El Dorado County, John Heidel. He's going to introduce today's program as well as our first panel of experts.
Thank you, Danielle. Welcome everyone to this webinar. I want to start out by offering my personal appreciation and the County Board of Supervisors appreciation to GSEC for helping us set this up. Barry Broom and Danielle Casey in particular for their efforts. This webinar came about as a result of a check-in and kind of a roundtable discussion of what we can do to help our small businesses. And it's led to this great opportunity, I think, for the small businesses to learn today in terms of what are the alternatives available, what are the best courses of action. So again, I want to thank GSEC starting in with that. I also want to thank our chambers throughout El Dorado County for spreading the notices of this particular webinar and also for collecting questions for us. So there was a lot of interaction that went on there, and I think that's of benefit to all of us to be able to understand what are the real questions for El Dorado County businesses as opposed to bigger businesses in a more larger corporate setting or whatever, because we have a lot of very small businesses that we're hoping are able to survive this COVID-19 pandemic and come out on the other side in a breath of sunshine, but we all need to plot our courses and do the best we can to navigate with this stuff. I'd also like to thank our CAO, Don Ashton, who's on the webinar as well, for his participation in this. He's our GSEC rep, so he has the day-to-day interaction with GSEC, and that's greatly appreciated because that communication is all important to our economic development and business growth within El Dorado County. I'd also like to thank our El Dorado County Economic Development team, who's led by Kyle Zimbelman. They've done a wonderful job of trying to prepare information for our small businesses, be there when they get the phone calls to be able to help and assist. And that assistance is ongoing. So if you do end up with a situation that you don't know quite how to navigate through or what your choices are, please reach out and contact our economic development team and they can help you get in touch with the right kind of people to answer those questions. And then I also want to thank just anyone else who's participated in preparing this webinar, getting ready for it. This is an all-inclusive activity, and hopefully we'll find opportunities to do similar things when we get the other side of the COVID-19 and into more prosperous times. So with that, I'm going to move through an explanation of the program. Instead of formal presentations, today's program will be focused on hearing from experts here to answer specific questions we have heard repeatedly from local businesses in relation to COVID-19, issues and resources, and provide guidance. So that's the overall thrust of the webinar. This will be held in two phases. The first, we will welcome a panel of local banking experts and then transition to a Q&A discussion focused on personnel-related issues. So those two sections. Today's banking panel includes Jeffrey Adamski, Executive Vice President and Senior Loan Officer for First Northern Bank. And Jeffrey, if you'd give us just a little bit of your background so that we know what your history is.
Certainly. Thank you very much for this opportunity to participate today. Been in banking for 38 years, the last 26 years with First Northern Bank. First Northern Bank is a business community bank focused primarily on the I-80 corridor between Auburn and Walnut Creek, The other corridor we have is Highway 50 corridor. Right now we're up to Rancho Cordova, but El Dorado County is calling us, so we see that in our future. So that's certainly good news. We're excited about that down road. And we're a full-service community bank, and as such, I manage all the commercial lending and business activities for the bank.
Very good. Thank you, Jeffrey. We also have Riley Gardner, who's a senior credit analyst with River City Bank. So Riley, would you likewise share some of your background?
Sure. My name is Riley Gardner. I manage a $180 million commercial loan portfolio for River City Bank. We handle all of the commercial underwriting through our team. In addition, we manage a portfolio of commercial customers spanning both commercial real estate, business banking, and also middle market commercial and industrial banking. To touch on River City Bank, we are locally owned here in Sacramento. We have about 2.5 billion in assets, though we do business all over the state of California.
Very good. Thank you for that. We know that these banking leaders are also on the front lines of putting in many, many hours and processing years worth of loan applications in 1 week. So we know that the impetus is in trying to get the loans established, and there's a lot of hard work that goes into that. So I want to thank you for that part of it and taking the time to join us today, given all of the other demands that are on your time. So I really appreciate that. And with that, I'm now going to turn the session back over to Danielle Casey with the GSEC team, who will facilitate a question and answer period for the first portion of the program. Danielle.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all so much. All right. And for those of you watching online, please also take a look. We have slides that are running concurrent with me asking these questions. So if we start talking for a little bit and you need a reminder on what the topic is, it's right there on your screen. All right, for the first question, and it'd be great if Riley could start off on the answer for this one. How quickly will the current available PPP funding run out? What's going on? This changes, it seems, by the minute, by the hour. What do you anticipate in terms of timing and amounts for another round?
Sure, that is the big question, and that's driving a lot of the recent stress around companies trying to get their PPP applications in and processed as soon as possible. The latest I'm hearing as of this morning is that approximately 300 billion of the 349 billion of the available funds has already been allocated, and that many people are predicting these funds to run out within this week. I've heard Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin also commenting on this. I'm not sure the exact timeline for when availability will go to zero. That said, we would expect this to certainly be fully used by next week. One other item to note, though, is Congress is currently working on a second package, which I believe would be up to $250 billion in additional funds for the program. But we are uncertain currently as to the status of that or what the timing will be for those funds being made available.
Jeff?
Thank you. I guess I'd add to that this is a call to arms for everybody out there on the pipe listening on this call. You need to get hold of your congressional representatives and ask them to make this an absolute priority. The banks and credit unions and fintech lenders are active. We have over 4,000 people processing requests. We have a lot more small businesses that need help, and they need to move soon. We're going to continue to process applications and basically put them on standby, subject to the likelihood of more funding.
That's great to know about the continued processing. All right, so our second question, why can't I use my credit union for stimulus related loans? Is there a list or clarity on which banks will actually do business with non-banking customers? Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Maybe Jeff, you want to start us off on this one.
Sure. This was an opt-in process, so as a bank or credit union or fintech lender, you could opt into processing these Paycheck Protection Program opportunities. Some credit unions weren't set up, and there was an approval process they had to go through for this. First Northern Bank, and I'm sure River City Bank, we were preferred lenders in the SBA program, so we had already kind of been certified through their program. So we were able to start on day one. Credit unions, again, can choose to participate. I think a few are, and there are traditional community banks that also are not participating for a variety of reasons. But we're active, and the good news is we have 5 or 6 good community banks in the region that are participating, and there are probably a couple credit unions participating, and the fintech industry is kicking in as well. I know Cabbage and eBay are active, so we've got lots of alternatives for perhaps some of the smaller micro opportunities that somebody may want to process. So again, it's an opt-in process, and the credit unions have to make that decision for themselves.
Yeah, to add to that, from our perspective, after the legislation was passed and the race to roll out the program began, there's a lot of uncertainty with respect to the SBA guidance that banks were facing when considering how to best approach this program. There have been different approaches taken by banks, including automated processes for applications. I know some big banks were focused on getting it through this way. I think a lot of community banks have taken a more manual approach. I know for our bank, we've been forced to take a manual approach just because the sheer number of changes in the guidance on the program. And so on a bank by bank basis, there's a different level of appetite for participation in the program. And also a lot of banks are just overwhelmed by requests. So with respect to the question, who is lending to anyone other than existing customers, that's really tough, and it's going to depend on your bank, how many applications they have and the resources they have to get through them.
Very good. Thank you. I am seeing some questions on lists of lenders. So that's information that, as we have that, especially specific to El Dorado County, we can add that to follow-up materials.
Mm-hmm. You can also check the SBA website for that.
Exactly. So question number 3. One thing we've heard from quite a few folks: I wasted so much time going to my banker only to find I did not have the material together needed for a loan or a PPP application, which wasted my time and theirs. What materials should any business have in hand to be as prepared as possible? Oh, and let's start with Jeff.
Well, as Riley mentioned earlier, this was an evolving process, and literally in less than 2 weeks, banks have put together a program with very limited guidance from SBA in the actual legislation that was passed. I would say most community banks are taking a conservative approach with respect to this, so we're asking for documentation that helps support the request. We here at First Northern, we want to see the W-3, which is the summary, W-2s, some other information to complete the current application, these types of things. But it's information most customers have readily available. I know there's some different qualifications at other banks, and you just have to accept the fact that each bank was able to interpret the legislation slightly different. And again, there was guidance that was coming out daily, if not several times each day, modifying and perhaps giving clarification on that guidance. But once you have a process in place, you tend to want to move forward with that process. So yes, but you should certainly call ahead, find out who you want to work with, call ahead. Every community bank has a list of documents they are going to require for the application, and it probably will vary slightly among those banks.
Yeah, and to echo Jeff's point on the rapidly changing nature of the guidance coming out, a lot of the stuff that was originally in the legislation was contradicted after the fact by various guidance that came out from first the Treasury Department and then second the SBA. So banks have been trying to sift through what will actually be acceptable for calculation methods, documentation, and certain items that need to be excluded from these loan calculations. So it's really been a challenge, and different banks are handling it different ways. In some cases, banks are even putting some of the responsibility on customers to determine what they want to include in the calculation. In terms of documents, I would say the main thing will be the application and then sufficient payroll data and backup reports to enable a bank to verify the numbers that you're including on the application. Everything should be able to be verified. Separately, one thing I think is important to note, if you are a new customer of the bank, it's a bit more involved for the bank to bring you on as a customer due to BSA and CIP requirements for banks with new customers. So for example, if you're a business and you're going to a bank that you haven't previously had a relationship with, you should be prepared to provide entity documents, a certificate of beneficial ownership, and other personal identifying information of both your business and the signers of your business to that bank for them to get through your application. So it will be a bit more in terms of the information that you'll need to have if you're going to a new bank to process the application rather than using your existing bank.
And just to follow up, Riley, yeah, BSA and CIP, these are legislations, a law that was passed that we have to adhere to, and they were not waived for the PPP program.
Yeah.
So for new customers, it's important, as Riley outlined, that you provide that information and don't argue about it, just accept it. And you may have to spend a little bit of time in your files to find some of that data, but if not, your current bank has that information on you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point.
All right. I'm seeing some of the questions come in the Q&A, which thank you all so much. And it's good to know that we're in sync, because the next question in our prepared list that's also been submitted today is, are the PPP loans forgivable if there is no demonstrated hardship, or maybe the question really is, is hardship required for forgiveness? And what does that criteria look like? How do we constitute it? Has that really been defined at this point? And then let's, Riley, maybe you want to kick this one off for us, please.
Sure. So I think there's two components of this. One, are the PPP loans forgivable? The answer to that is yes, and there's a set of conditions. I can briefly outline those after this. But first, the demonstrated hardship piece. I think the key point here that we are focused on is included in the application for the PPP program, and it requires customers to certify, or I should say applicants to certify, that current economic uncertainty makes this loan request necessary to support the ongoing operations of the applicant. And we think this is extremely broad and vague. The use of the word uncertainty could be relevant to any business. I mean, in theory, any company or business could have someone come down with COVID-19 and be forced to shut down. I think there's uncertainty across the economy. And so with respect to the forgivable component of this, yes, these loans are potentially 100% forgivable, subject to a list of requirements that basically center around maintaining your number of full-time employees and maintaining salary levels, and only using the funds for approved uses.
Great. Jeff, did you want to add any more perspective to that, or are you good?
I think Riley's spot on the first interpretation. The concept that you could be impacted is very broad. And so we've moved forward with that. We're not questioning people's intent. They're making that judgment for themselves. The second thing is, I would suggest that the goal of this program is to keep people employed and to bring back employees. So that, as long as you adhere to that global effort, you're probably going to meet the 75% allocation to employee cost with respect to getting this grant forgiven. But you need to bring back, keep employees or bring them back to have this forgiven. And we're providing additional guidance. We're getting guidance from SBA now on this part of it. And again, this was not in place when this program was put in, the details of it was not put in place when the program was rolled out. Banks in general are, I think, now formulating their plan for how they're going to deal with this part of the program. But again, if you focus on keeping employees and bringing them back, I don't think most people are going to have a problem with this meeting this requirement.
Yeah, Jeff's right on with that. And one other thing I would add is that these loans are not 100% forgivable or 0% forgivable. The forgiveness amount would simply be reduced if, for example, there was a reduction in employees or a reduction in salary outside of specified levels of the program.
All right. Fun part of webinars, you can't plan for a barking dog. Okay, so our next question is, I have no idea what the best course of action for my business is right now. Do I go for PPP? Do I seek a disaster advance loan? What order should I do this in? So if you have some guidance for folks there, and Jeff, let's go back to you for the start.
This has been a global question that I've been advising clients to address, that it's not just a 60-day problem. It's not just a 180-day issue that you're facing. It's probably more like an 18-month to 2-year issue that you have to work through on this process. And I think there's a solution for all of those timelines, and certainly the PPP is something that if you're eligible, you should take advantage of. And that's why we need the additional funding. I think most people will meet the grant requirements. There'll be some percentage that doesn't. That's fine. That's the way the program's structured. But then there's that midterm. Look out 6 months from now. How do I keep my operation going 6 months from now? And there's another program that the state of California has called the iBank Go Biz program. And we have a couple organizations that are active here in this region. And they offer a 3-year line, and they're operating under disaster programs as well. And they have a loan that's 95% guaranteed to the banks or to a credit union. But again, you have to be certified to participate in the program. That's a pretty streamlined process. But that's right now we have it structured as a 3-year line of credit converting to a 3-year loan. So that addresses the second and third part of my concern for businesses. The PPP gets you immediately through this next 60 to 90 days. The line of credit gets you through the next 18 months, and then you can, hopefully the business is rebounded, and you can start paying back that debt over an amortized period of 3 years. And that's going to be 3 years out. So I think it's a total picture you have to look at, and that's what we would like to see businesses do. We want to see them be here long term, and I think it's a long-term solution.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, to add to that, I think one thing that businesses should be aware of is that it's not simply that either you get money through the Paycheck Protection Program or you have no good options. There are also employee retention payroll tax credits that are available now, and you're only eligible to get those if you do not use the PPP program. And those are essentially for employers with 100 or fewer full-time employees, where you could get a credit up to $10,000 per employee for payroll tax credits. So for certain businesses that may not be able to open during the 8-week period, or may not know when they'll next be able to open, they might be concerned, if I take this money, do I have employees to pay it to? And we've heard that from certain restaurant owners locally, concerned about when they'll be able to reopen their businesses. And so I think there is some discussion over, are the tax benefits equivalent to or greater than the benefit of PPP funds to your business, depending upon the outcomes. And so that's a question for each company to look at. I'd say in most cases, for most businesses, it will be preferable to use the PPP program, assuming these loans can be 100% forgiven if you use them properly. It is really a lot of money to help fund payroll for the next 2 months. And for certain businesses that we've talked to in the community, it means a ton. I mean, it's the difference between laying off workers or not. It's an emotional and difficult time for a lot of people in the community. This program isn't solving everything, but it's certainly helping a lot of businesses.
Excellent. Well, I have 2 more prepped questions, and then I'll be handing it back to the supervisor to take us into the next phase of the call. But I do want to mention now, because I'm seeing so many great questions from participants, and letting everybody know that our speakers have agreed to go a little long today, about another 15 minutes or so past the originally scheduled 2 p.m. So we will use that time to try to come back to all of these questions, and again, also do written follow-up as needed. So since we're kind of getting close to that halfway point, I wanted to let everybody know that. Our next question then for this panel is, my company is a nonprofit. How does this apply to me? We also had the question submitted live just now. Are nonprofits able to receive a loan just like other small businesses? Riley, you had some great comments on that before, if you could take this.
Sure. So the program is definitely open to 501c3 organizations. It's also open to veterans organizations and tribal organizations. We've done a lot of these for nonprofits, and it's certainly been a big benefit to the community that they do have access to the program. That said, a couple tricky areas that we've encountered is with respect to tribal organizations that have revenues derived from gambling or casinos. It's still not entirely clear to us whether or not they can be eligible for PPP program funds. And a lot of that's coming from certain certifications that are included within the SBA portal. Jeff, you might have some more to add on the nonprofit discussion as well.
Well, I would consider this a unique opportunity. Many times nonprofits are left out of some of the business guarantee programs, and under the traditional SBA program it is, but under the PPP program they are eligible. And I would say 20% of our volume is nonprofits at this time. The other thing is under the iBank program, nonprofits are have always been eligible for that program, and they'll actually do some nonprofit classifications that the PPP program won't do. So if you're a 501c6, which is kind of a membership driven like a chamber, you're eligible to participate in iBank, but you're not eligible to participate in the Paycheck Protection Program. So there's kind of nuances of it, but most not 501c3s are going to be eligible for the Paycheck Protection Program.
Yeah.
All right, and this is a shorter question, but I will lob this to Jeff to tackle, and then Riley, if you want to weigh in, and then after this question, Supervisor Heidel is going to take us to the next stage. I am fairly certain I will have to, unfortunately, close my business regardless of the PPP funding. Even if I secure it, it's not going to be enough. Any guidance on the best way to do so with minimal liability, or is there any advice in terms of whether I should try for PPP if I think I'm still going to have to shutter? Jeff,
well, this is a really difficult question, and it's the issue that most of Main Street is wrestling with. Can they make it through this period? I would say you're taking the application with the intent of keeping employees on board, and as such, I would not advise you, if you intend to close down your business, to take the PPP, because there is a note portion to this, a 2-year amortization of the balance of that note, that if it's not forgiven, for most businesses is going to be quite, it's going to be a heavy load. It's going requirement on the backside of it if the debt is not forgiven. So, so I'm looking at it going, don't take it, because you're going to be faced with a situation, put more pressure on yourself down road. I think there's other legal advice you can pursue, but the intent of this program is to retain current employees or hire back employees that you have, like furloughed.
I would echo the part about the loan forgiveness. If you are certain that you're going to be closing your business and you do participate in the program, I would make very certain that you follow all the steps to ensure the loan is completely forgivable. Otherwise, it's akin to a commercial loan, which would be fully amortizing after the 6-month deferred period for the remainder of the 2-year term. So it very much is a loan from the bank that is forgivable, provided you follow a certain set of conditions over the 8-week period after the disbursement of funds. But in this case, I'd say, yeah, if you're planning to close, it is a tricky situation that you want to consider in more detail.
Thank you both. We will definitely come back and tackle as many of these open questions on the Q&A as possible. But now I'd love to hand it back to Supervisor Heidel.
Yeah, thank you, Danielle. So I would like to thank both of our panelists, Jeff and Riley, for their insights and guidance relative to what we're dealing with here. I would also like to mention, as Danielle previously defined it, we will come back as time permits to address open Q&A with all of today's speakers. Our next guest, then moving through the program here, is Cassandra Farinini. Cass is a partner with Downey Brand, and Cass routinely defends public entities, staffing agencies, restaurant owners, and internet startups against a variety of employment claims, including class actions, wage and hour, sexual harassment, discrimination, wrongful termination, ERISA, and fraud, all with great success. So with that, Cass, would you like to give us a little bit more about your background?
Certainly. I've been an employment lawyer, Downey Brand, for about 20 years, and primarily my practice consists of doing litigation, but also advising employers as to how to handle various employment issues. So this has been quite the busy time for me with all the new fun legislation that's being passed. So I'm here to answer whatever questions you may have.
Very good. So let's go ahead and move to the questions then that we have for Cass. So the first one is, can we take the temperature and ask health-related questions of our employees as they arrive at work?
So yes, you can. There was an issue previously. You were not allowed to take employee temperatures, but very early on in this COVID-19 process, the EEOC came out and said that that's no longer a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So you can take temperatures. You can ask health-related questions. You can ask, if they're experiencing the symptoms associated with COVID-19, which is cough, shortness of breath, fever, chills, things like that. The one thing, obviously, anytime you're dealing with employee health issues, you have to be mindful of privacy concerns, employee privacy concerns. And so you should do these things in a discreet way, on a need-to-know basis. I mean, a room full of everybody holding up their hand is probably not the best way to go about it. A lot of employers are using checklists that employees fill out as they come in and things like that. So don't share the responses with anyone who doesn't need to know the answers, but beyond that, you are certainly entitled to find out if anybody is symptomatic.
Okay, thank you for that. So our next question is, what should our response be if the employee has some symptoms of COVID-19?
So as a general matter, better safe than sorry. It's probably better to have one employee stay at home than have 20 sick the next week. So you can certainly send your employees home if they're experiencing symptoms. Keep in mind, figure out whether or not you can take advantage of the new legislation to give them paid sick leave, and we can talk a little bit more about that as we go on. If the employee is seeking a diagnosis, then that might fit you into those benefits under those acts. But certainly, employers are sending people home anywhere from 72 hours to 14 days if they have symptoms. So just, the key is communication with your employee, but certainly protect your workforce.
Thank you, Cass. So next question gets a little bit deeper into that subject. What should our response be if the employee confirms that someone they live with has symptoms or has been diagnosed positive for COVID-19?
It's kind of the same answer in a way. If you're concerned that the employee is going to come up positive, keep them out of work. This is the time too to find out a little bit more information. If they're caring for somebody who is symptomatic of COVID-19, or if they're seeking treatment, again, this is a circumstance where you may be able to take advantage of paid sick leave. And just, as you always would with any employee health issue, be gentle and discreet with respect to the information that you receive.
Okay, I understand. Thank you. So what happens when we've had an employee that is tested positive? Who can we tell or inform of that positive confirmation, and what should our reaction steps be?
So if you have an employee who tested positive, certainly they need to stay home for the 14 days. To the extent that you can obtain the information you need under the federal laws, the Coronavirus Response Act, you should begin gathering that documentation, basically a statement from the employee, any kind of doctor's notes, and the like, because it's your responsibility to have that documented if you want to claim those tax benefits down the road. As far as the rest of your workforce goes, it's really a judgment call in how you want to handle it. Certainly, you can say that there has been an exposure in the workplace or that somebody in the workplace is positive. I wouldn't use the employee's name or specifically identify them, because that, again, leads you into the realm of privacy and medical privacy that you don't necessarily want to step into. Some employers may wish to send proven contacts with that employee home. Really depends on what your workplace is like. If you have, one worker at one end of the football field and another worker at the other end of the football field, chances are that you're relatively safe, that they're not working closely side by side. So it really kind of depends on your social distancing, your workforce. Most HR people know their workforce pretty well, but you can certainly send people home if you so desire.
Okay, knowing that each individual county is kind of track their COVID-19 cases, is it important for an employer to notify the county of residence of that employee if a COVID-19 confirmed case happens from the standpoint of the public health officer, letting them know to be included in the statistics, or are we relying on the hospitals and other medical facilities to do that reporting?
My understanding is that as of my last information, that there's no requirement that one report such things to the county. Certainly, if your employee is seeking treatment, I would assume that the healthcare system is tracking and reporting those things.
Okay, thank you. So on to the next question, and this is one that I've heard over and over again. Are we an essential business, and who defines what an essential business is within the state, within the county, within a city, if you're in a city's jurisdiction? How does that all work?
So there's a number of orders. There's Governor Newsom's order that came out earlier this month. His order relies on federal standards. So I think there's even a link within that order that you can click on, and you can see what kind of businesses are deemed essential businesses. And it's things like, sewage treatment places, or telecommunications, transportation, things that are basically needed to keep our civilization civilized, are the essential businesses. In addition to the governor's order, there's also particular orders for each county. And so, for example, Sacramento's order, I think they put out an updated order last week, and it has a very detailed iteration of what is considered an essential business. And it runs the gamut from people working in agriculture on farms to carry out for restaurants to those same kind of police, fire type people. So if you look at the orders and look at the federal standard, you should be able to determine whether or not you are an essential business. And that is important to figure out, because it can be helpful in ascertaining whether you're entitled to some of the benefits that are available for your employees under the emergency FMLA and emergency sick leave laws.
Okay, thank you, Cass, for that. When are employees entitled to EFMLA and sick pay under the new federal laws?
So there's a number of standards that make them entitled to potential sick leave. And of course, you want to be able to take advantage of that because there's benefits to you as an employer. If they are subject to a isolation order or quarantine order, and they cannot work or telework because of that, then they would be entitled to that benefit. And that's, again, why it's important if you're an essential business, maybe they can work or telework regardless of whether or not there is an isolation order in place. So that's why these questions all kind of go together and you have to think about it. If they've been advised to stay home by a healthcare provider and they can't work or telework, they would be entitled to pay. If they are caring for an individual who is subject to one of these orders or has experienced symptoms or is under treatment or anything along those lines, they may be entitled to this pay. Also, to the extent that all of the schools are closed, if you have people in your workforce that simply can't telework, but must stay home to care for their children, they might be subject to this act. People teleworking might be subject to the extent that they're unable to do that during this act. So it's very fact dependent and very circumstantial, but you know, once you kind of look at things on a case by case basis for all of your employees, you can see where you can slot yourselves in to the act to get your folks those benefits if they're unable to work.
Very good. And so now to our last question. What are the pros and cons in laying off employees versus furloughing? What is better for them and what is safer for my business?
So there are great benefits right now that people can get under unemployment insurance. They're enhanced because the federal government has injected some money into that. Whether or not you want to lay off people or furlough is again fact dependent. I'm a fan of furloughing for a number of reasons. For businesses that see themselves being able to swing right back into action when everything reopens, you're going to need a workforce to do that. So to the extent that you're able to maintain people, that's a great thing. As I think everybody discussed earlier, if you want to take advantage of the PPP, it matters whether or not you have the same head counts and payroll as you did when you got the loan. So that's another great argument for furloughing. And for a lot of businesses, it's just hard to find good people and you don't want to let them go. And you also, you know, build your business and build your family, so to speak, and you want them to know that you're looking out for them and you care about them and you want to do the best thing for them. And so, you know, to the extent that you can furlough rather than lay off, it's not a bad thing. There's some pitfalls to furloughing that you have to be careful about. You need to be careful about how you frame it to your employees about what's going on. If you just, you know, tell them that you're furloughing them and give them a date that they're going to come back to work, it allows you also to keep their medical benefits if you want to do that, which is beneficial to them. And all of those things make it a little bit clearer that it's a furlough and not a layoff. The potential pitfall with a furlough is you don't want it to look like a layoff because that blows up your whole plan to get forgiveness and to get those people back on your books. So you have to be careful about how you're going to go about it. But it's actually kind of a really great option. Obviously, if you're going to go under, maybe the furlough isn't the best plan, and you do have to lay people off. But now if you're going to be laid off in your lifetime, now it's not a bad time to have that happen because of all these extra benefits that are floating around out there.
Yeah, the added federal benefits for unemployment are pretty significant, so people have to always weigh that. And so, very good. Thank you, Cass. Is there any other final comments you'd like to add, Cass?
No, I guess the thing that is foremost in my mind is just document, 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 as always in the land of employment law. Make sure you're documenting when your folks are taking advantage of the paid sick leave so that you have that later for when you want to claim the tax breaks. Somebody had also asked a question regarding potential liability, and I think obviously the land of employment law in California is strewn with potential pitfalls that may lead to liability. So anytime you're laying people off, or if you're going to furlough people, you need to be aware of various laws. Does the Cal WARN Act apply? Some of the provisions of that have been suspended, but you need to really be focused on, potential wrongful termination claims. And if I terminate my employee after they've taken the sick leave, is that potentially a problem? And so as always, you need to be mindful of those things and analyze those things with respect to any sort of termination or discipline that you're planning on meting out. The other issue that a lot of people have asked about is, what if my employees get COVID at work, and what's going to happen then? My thoughts on that are that, as a general matter, if your employees get sick at work, that is usually an issue that's covered by workers' compensation. And so the potential civil liability is not necessarily going to be a huge problem. I think it's also going to be difficult for people to establish that they got COVID-19 at work. I mean, because people wander around with this, they're asymptomatic. If you go to the grocery store, you could get it there. If you go to work, you could get it there. So I think that's actually a minor concern, though I know a lot of employers are very concerned about it. So that's all I'd have to say.
All right, thank you for your final comments and stuff. We certainly appreciate your participation in the webinar. So again, our thanks and appreciation for all of that. So on through.
I'm sorry, Supervisor, if you could just restate that last sentence. I think there was a delay in your mute.
Okay. What I'm saying is I'm turning it back over to you, Danielle, because I know we've had a number of questions raised. And I think we have time to go ahead and start through those series since it's not at 2 o'clock yet. And we know we have the 15-minute extension. So over to you.
I completely agree. Okay, well, thank you. Thank you. Again, so many wonderful comments. I did just add another post on the chat to remind everyone that we will also do a written question and answer. We'll go back through all of these and type those up carefully, and the video is going to be available. Because we are still a little bit on the topic, I'm looking at a couple of employee-related questions, and then we'll circle back on the banking. Cass, can you ask an infected employee who they have been in contact with inside a business?
I think you can. I think you can be more subtle than that, though. A lot of businesses have cameras, and you can see where that employee's been and who they've been talking to. A lot of businesses, obviously if my office is right next to your office or my cube is right next to your cube, there we are together. And you know who's coming in and out. So I don't know that you have to ask them. But certainly you can ask them. I would be subtle in, how you go about talking about these issues, but sure. If you know that they've been in contact, they're probably getting asked that, I would imagine. I don't know, but I would imagine that the healthcare system is asking them that same question. Contact tracing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'll bet every one of you probably has a comment on this next question from Teresa Davis. Do we jeopardize PPP forgiveness if we wait until we reopen for the business to rehire and put laid off employees back on payroll? So maybe Riley, if you have comments, and then Jeff.
Sorry, Danielle, I had trouble hearing the question. Can you repeat that?
I'd be happy to. The question was from Teresa Davis, and she wanted to know, do we jeopardize PPP forgiveness if we wait until we reopen for the business to then rehire and put the laid off employees back on payroll? So does that hurt your forgiveness opportunity?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think all banks and lenders right now are still waiting for more explicit SBA guidance on the topic of forgiveness. The legislation provides a number of key requirements to get full loan forgiveness, and most of those center around one, the funds being used within the 8-week period immediately following loan funding. Two, 75% of those funds going to payroll. Three, those funds being used on approved uses, including payroll, utilities, rent, and mortgage interest for obligations that were already in place before February 15th, 2020. And then the other component is you have to maintain the same level of full-time employees from essentially before this period began, or you have to, I should say, and you have to maintain salary levels at least 75% of previous levels for employees who make less than $100,000 per year. So all that said, there's a lot more that's going to be coming out. And if you're looking at the timing of when do you hire these people back, I think you do need to be very cognizant of the fact that these funds need to be used within an 8-week period. And so if you're not using those funds, you're liable to face a challenge with respect to obtaining the full forgiveness amount. So I think that's something you do need to look at carefully. Banks right now, we're not giving explicit advice on that because we simply don't know how a lot of these details are going to shake out. But I'd say that's something you should talk to your advisors about, for example, your accountant or attorney.
Excellent. Well, you did such a great job on that. I'm just going to keep tackling questions for everyone so we can hit as many as possible. Hopefully this one is, I think, looking for a little bit of insight into the brain of the SBA, but Donnie O'Neill asked, they've submitted a question or submitted an application over a week ago. The SBA emailed back with questions that have been responded to and addressed. So does that mean funds have been allocated, or they should still expect to hear from the SBA again? And maybe Jeff, do you have any idea on that?
And I think what you said is that they had applied online to the SBA portal. Is that correct?
I would have to ask for clarity on that, but let's go with that assumption
Okay, that's what I think I heard in the question. Well, yes. SBA, you have to understand, they've never dealt with a disaster of this size in the history of the organization. It's always been a regional type of disaster, such as the fires that we experienced here in California. And they're actually pretty good at that size, but again, nobody was prepared for something of this scale, including SBA. So we had a client apply about maybe a month ago, maybe six weeks, in that range, 6 weeks to a month ago, and they just heard back from SBA. I think they've beefed up their staffing and they're getting quicker, but I don't think you're going to hear back in days. They have their team that they're processing with in centralized points, and we're fortunate one of those teams, the disaster relief groups, is right here in Sacramento, and they're a large employer here. But they had to hire, we were listening to the SBA, they had to hire over 1,000 phone receptionists just to handle the phone calls, okay? So the volume is just unprecedented. Nobody's used to dealing with this much volume. My understanding is, again, the time is getting better, but the key is have your documents ready and immediately respond. And, I would plan that it's probably going to be a 2-week to a month process to hear from them.
Great, thank you. And my understanding is that it was through their bank, but the questions were posed by the SBA. So I'm assuming your answer probably still holds, although we can follow up if it doesn't. I'm going to hit one more question. It's about 1:55, and then we will go to some closing comments, but then circle back for about 15 minutes more of Q&A for those that want to stick with us. I do have a submitted question. If I have saved up reserve funds, do I still qualify for forgiveness on PPP? Riley, any thoughts, or Jeff?
Sure. I would say, yes, you still qualify for forgiveness under PPP, provided the use of any funds taken from the program are used consistent with the guidelines to enable loan forgiveness. I think you shouldn't be necessarily punished for having reserve funds in good times. I think that's a prudent business decision. And that said, the real spirit of the program in our interpretation is to help employers maintain their employees and maintain those employees' salary levels through this difficult time when they may otherwise be forced to either lay people off, furlough their workers, or close. And so I don't think having reserve funds would preclude you from participating in the program or getting loan forgiveness. And I don't think that would be inconsistent with the intent of the program.
Great. Well, thank you. I am going to very quickly hand it back over to Supervisor Heidel, who I believe is then going to engage with Chief Administrative Officer Ashton for some final comments. And I would ask, one of the questions I have seen, because you all are the El Dorado County experts, are there any grants to small businesses in context of the crisis, or anything that small businesses specifically need to know from El Dorado County as you offer these wrapping comments?
Yeah, so again, I would like to ask everybody to refer those kind of questions to Kyle Zimbelman. He has much greater depth of knowledge and more experience in that area than either Don or I do. So I would just ask, and Kyle, are you on? Do you want to answer that quickly, or should we just defer that to a follow-up?
I would say you can, I don't know if my video is working, but yes, just send any questions. If Danielle, you want to put my email address on out after you send the survey out after this webinar, send questions my way and we can help address any specific questions you have to your business in the county.
Very good. Thank you, Kyle. So with that, I again would like to extend my personal appreciation for all of the activity involved here. It took a lot of work, but I think it's been a very productive session from my perspective. And with that, I'd like to hand it off to Don Ashton, our El Dorado County CAO, Chief Administrative Officer, for any final comments.
Thank you, Supervisor. For those listening, again, my name is Don Ashton. I'm the CAO for El Dorado County, and I am a member of the Board of Directors for Greater Sacramento. Thank you so much to the to Riley, Jeff, and Cass for taking time out of your day. I know you're extremely busy. Very helpful and relevant information at this time. And thank you, Danielle and Barry Broom, for partnering with us on these efforts. It's said a lot. These times are unprecedented right now, and information changes so quickly. We are committed to doing our best to helping our business sector in El Dorado County, working with our partners as we navigate through this process. One question that was asked is, when can non-essential businesses open? And that's one of the comments I want to make. Yesterday, the governor outlined 6 indicators he will be using to determine when to begin opening up the economy. I would encourage you to look at the governor's website to get more information on those. He did not give a specific date. My read on it is it's going to be very clear. It will likely be a phased approach with the #1 priority of protecting public health and safety. So I don't think it's going to be quickly. It's going to take some time. So continue to watch for that. Any questions you may have, please, we have established a business protection working group and committee in El Dorado County that consists of our economic development staff, our local chambers to assist. If you have any questions from your business that you need to get answered, contact your chamber, contact our economic development staff, Kyle Zimbelman. If we don't know the answers, we'll likely reach out to Barry and Danielle for help. There's a lot of unknowns right now, and everyone's doing the best they can. So thank you for your patience. Thank you for adhering to the stay-at-home orders as we try to protect our public, recognizing it's putting a hardship on you, your families, and everyone involved. We recognize that, and we're going to do everything we can to try to help. All I have. Thanks.
Thank you, Don. So back to you, Danielle.
All right. Well, very good. Thank you again to to everyone. Thanks to everyone in El Dorado County who brought up some of these questions, and we're also willing to help us put this together. So it's been tremendously beneficial. And thanks to the kindness of our speakers who, within very, very little notice, were willing and able to participate in this with about 3 business days of a heads up. So especially when we know they're working those 18-hour days to try to get unprecedented amounts of applications through. So I'm going to take the next 15 minutes that we asked them to please impart with us, and I'm simply going to go through some of these questions in the order in which they came in. So I'm going to start at the top. What is the projection for the EIDL loan advance funding? Is it likely to run out? Jeff, what are your words of wisdom?
Every entity operates with a budget, and they have an allocation for this for the EDLI loans, the economic disaster loans. What I was told, what I had been hearing, and some SBA individuals had represented, was that it was being kind of throttled back because of the unprecedented demand that they were having on the program. And the number that I heard was 15,000 was the maximum loan. Now, today I heard through a third source that no, they're back up to 2 million. So maybe they're able to offer 2 million, but again, they throttled back initially, and they're changing daily, just like the PPP program is changing daily. So maybe they're back to the 2 million. My suspicion is it's probably in the lower end. The clients that we've seen have gotten loans, EDLI loans, in the $15,000 range.
Right.
I would echo what Jeff had to say about that. I seem to hear something different every day on the amount with these. I've most recently heard that it's going towards the smaller end. I've also heard that the expected schedule for processing these has become extended due to the extremely high demand for the program. But because we're not directly involved in the program, businesses are applying directly with the SBA for these. We don't have greater insight into the process or how it's going.
Great. I just saw a question on the chat, and because I am curious myself, unless we're the source, what is the best place to keep up with the almost daily changes to the EDLI loans, PPP? The SBA website does not seem to be extremely helpful. So, I mean, I would add that all of our communities are monitoring and maintaining COVID pages. We have information, but are there some fantastic sources that seem to be the best go-tos in anyone's opinion? Riley, do you have any thoughts?
That's a tough question. I think we're constantly sharing with everyone in our professional community, whether it be law firms we work with, accounting firms we work with, and then among our employees and our executive team. So it really is a big effort to share information and keep everyone current because there's information coming out from a number of different sources. I'd say the most reliable stuff that we look for is directly from the SBA because that governs our participation in the program and how we apply certain rules and practices. And I'd say that's probably still the #1 source. But that said, keep your ears open and pay attention. And especially with the forgiveness component of it, we're still awaiting more detail on that. So that's something that I think everyone will be watching for. I did notice there was a link to, I think it was the interim final rule 2 on the SBA website, which doesn't actually provide access to a document. So maybe that's coming, but we're not sure.
Mysterious links. I have a question that I believe would require Cass looping back in. So there's my little warning since we haven't pinged her in a second. Cass, Can you help answer what type of proof is required to use the 10 days of extra paid sick leave? Are those extra days only for use for an employee that has COVID, or are there other applicable circumstances? And again, what type of proof do they need to provide?
So it applies to more than just people that have COVID. It also applies to people that can't work or telework because they're taking care of their children who are at school, people that have it, people that are taking care of somebody that has it. And so it will apply in a number of circumstances, and there's basic information that you can get from the employee. So for any kind of leave that qualifies, what you need to get is, you know, obviously your employee's name, the dates that they're out, and a statement from your employee saying that they're unable to work or telework, and then an indication of the qualifying reason. That's just basic information that you should get from your employees for all of the qualifying leaves. And then for particular leaves, for example, if your employee has been quarantined or told by a doctor that they're not allowed to work, ask for a doctor's note, just as you would ordinarily. If your employee is out because the school is closed, there's additional information you have to get from your employee, which includes the child's name, the name of the school that was closed, a statement that there's no other suitable person to care for the child that would, you know, so that establishes that you can't work. And so it really is a case-by-case basis, depending upon the nature of the leave, but you are permitted to get these statements from your employees, and you should get these statements from your employees, because down the road, you're going to need to establish that all of these leaves were qualifying if you want to take advantage of the tax breaks.
Great. Thank you very much, Cass. These are this next question, I'm going to loop two in together because they are specific for our bankers. So I'll start with Jeff, and then I'll let Riley close it off, because the first part of the question is, are both of your banks currently accepting PPP applications from business owners that don't already have a business account with you? And in addition to that, regarding River City Bank, we do have a small business on the line today that applied with River City on the 5th of April. They are an existing customer with a small business loan relationship already. We know you all have been very busy. Any idea on what those turnaround timeframes might be for being able to hear back? So maybe if we start with Jeff and then let Riley close up with that, with the two-part.
Right when we opened up the program, we had it available to customers and non-customers. As we've ramped up, and we have over 700 applications that we have processed or in the process of finalizing, we have narrowed that to existing customers only at this time. We'd like to have the ability to open it back up, but our capacity has been reached, and we also need assurances that the second round of funding is going to be there. So that's where we're currently at. I know some banks are primarily focused on their existing customers. Seems to be the general trend that I'm seeing out in the marketplace.
Yeah, to add to that, I think as we started, we were a bit more optimistic about how many of these applications we could get through. We've literally taken on hundreds of applications. We have processed successfully hundreds. I think the most recent tally I saw of the number of employees in the businesses that we've helped is over 16,000, which is an enormous amount of people in the community that are impacted by this. Specifically with the question regarding someone's application with our bank, I would expect that you will be contacted very soon. We have been working absolutely around the clock. Many guys on my team, myself included, were up until 2 a.m. For most of the nights of the last 2 weeks working on these things, trying to make sure that we do our small part to take care of our customers and take care of the community. With respect to new customers, I'd say our resources are very strained, trying to get through as many applications as we can that we already have. That said, we're not completely ruling out working with new customers, but it's difficult for us to make commitments on the timeline right now, especially with the fears around the first batch of money running out. And so we're definitely keeping our eyes open for any additional funds added to the program.
Great. I'm very curious on this next question. I'm going to assume that they were referring to PPP because that was the topic at the time, but is this available for seasonal farming operations? Or what resources are you aware of that could be available or are available for seasonal farming?
I can take that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, this is Jeff. Yes, farming operations certainly qualify, but you have to have, again, W-2 employees. So there are some farm labor companies that may not qualify. The labor company would, but the farmer would not be able to use that particular cost as a salary base for calculating their PPP. But again, the farm labor company would be eligible by themselves to apply to us. And we've processed a number of small farming operations that have been adversely impacted.
Mm-hmm. I would add to that too, that there's potentially a different calculation method for your average monthly payroll. The legislation provides for the ability to reference basically a period for seasonal employers that would be more reflective of your payroll that you would be paying out during the covered period, which would be the 8-week period after having the loan funded. So I would say, yes, seasonal businesses are able to apply through the program, but consider how that specific aspect of your business would impact the calculation method that you use for average monthly payroll.
All right. I'm going to try to squeeze in 2 more questions before we wrap. And again, we will collect all of this, take very good notes from all the wisdom imparted today, and follow up with comments for everyone. A question I have from Debbie Manning: can you go directly through the SBA if your bank that you have a relationship with is not doing PPP, or is it a requirement that you apply through a bank?
Well, it doesn't have to be a bank. It can be any number of sources. It could be a credit union. It could be a fintech company. I would say for most people, it's their community bank. So they certainly could apply at another bank if their bank is not participating, and we've seen that happen. We all know that there was a very large bank that reached their limit, and those people were approaching us for assistance. And at that time, we were taking applications from, from non-customers. I don't know if Riley has any additional comments he wants to make.
Yeah, I would echo that. In terms of, and I believe the question referenced applying to the SBA directly, we don't have too much information on that, and I haven't specifically heard of a case of someone doing that successfully, but I believe that is potentially an option under the program. I think the key here is FDIC insured institutions, farm credit system institutions, federally insured credit unions, or other SBA lenders. And I should correct, I don't believe you can apply directly to the SBA. That said, there are a number of technology-oriented companies that I've heard are starting to ramp up. I haven't heard of any success stories with using these, but I would imagine, especially if more funds are contributed to the program, there will be more and more options in terms of applying.
Well, thank you all again. I'm at 2:14, and because we will be following up with all of this, I would love to toss, if I could, our last 60 seconds to Barry Broom, Greater Sacramento Economic Council's President and CEO. This was really all made possible through the conversations and desire he had for our organization to be here for everyone in any way we can. So Barry, would you mind hopping in and just providing some final remarks?
Yeah, it's you know, a scary time, and you know, I've been doing this 31 years, and it's my first pandemic. But you know, we've gone through credit crisis in 2008. The capital markets were crashing. We almost took the world's financial institutions down, and then you know, for 10 consecutive years, had the greatest economic run in the history of the United States post World War II. So, you know, during these difficult times and sombering times, it's important that we all think in terms of our own, you know, ingenuity and resilience and the potential impact we can have on our community and on our region. So we're going to continue to push the optimism of recovery as an organization, and we won't be doing that without regard to the difficulties that so many people are facing. But, you know, John Jackson, who's chair of our Competitiveness Council, one of the things that he says, and I agree with, is, you know, leadership, the leadership currency is hope. And so, you know, let's stay hopeful, let's stay resilient, and let's continue to work together. And I want to thank Don, I want to thank John, I want to thank the Chamber leadership and everyone that collaborated with us today on this information. And Danielle, you know, I can see you have a future at Fox News or CNN because you are fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess that means Barry's going to assign me to do more webinars. And, I'm having a lot of fun doing it. So thank you, everyone. Stay tuned. We will have a link to the recording of the video out very soon. Please give us 24 to 48 hours to make sure that our written FAQ answers are as accurate and thorough as possible. But we will follow up with that as well. And we will make it available on our resource page on our website. That is selectsacramento.com/COVID-19 resources. Have a great rest of your week, and don't hesitate to call us if we can be of assistance. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
all.
Thank you, guys.